Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to my good friend, Representative Richard Hudson. I thank him very much. He's a freshman member and a dear friend and colleague, a leader in our freshman class. And I thank him not only for his work on Homeland Security and the Agriculture Committee, but also for the work that he has done dealing with health care on the Education and Workforce Committee. So it is now my pleasure to yield time to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Richard Hudson, for as much time as he may consume.
Thank you, gentlelady. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I tell you, my colleague from Missouri has been a true leader in Congress, and it's a real honor to serve with you, and I thank you for your leadership, particularly on this important issue. Obamacare is an absolute disaster. We've seen disastrous impacts back home in North Carolina by the loss of jobs. I talk to folks every day. When I go home every weekend. I travel the district. I talk to businesses, and folks tell me that they've more capital. And the reason they're doing that is because they don't know what the cost of health care are going to be. And so we've got businesses out there that could be expanding, that could be hiring people, but because of this health care law, because of the uncertainty created by it, because of the rising cost, we've got business people who are not hiring. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, we're not seeing job growth like we ought to see. That's why this is the flattest, longest recession we've seen in our country's history. This awful health care law is also destroying the greatest health care system in the world. We're seeing premiums increase. I get letters and emails every day from my constituents who tell me their premiums have gone up. I talked to a woman the other day who's working 3 jobs. Her husband's working part-time because he can't find full-time work, but she's working 3 jobs just so she can pay for health care. That's before the premium increase. Mr. Speaker, we've seen so many folks who've had their plans canceled. It was said that the lie of the century is that if you like your health care, you can keep it, because people are seeing their health care plans canceled. And Mr. Speaker, it's going to get worse, because when businesses have to start looking at whether they can afford to keep folks on the health care or not, whether the math adds up for them, whether they can afford to do that, given all the new excessive mandates, we're going to see more people lose their insurance. It's an absolute disaster. And Mr. Speaker, I'm committed to doing everything I can to repeal this law and replace it, because at the end of the day, this is about people. And in this country, the greatest country in the history of the world, we can do better than this. We can offer health care that is the world's best quality health care at a price that people can afford, and putting people in charge of their health care decisions, not bureaucrats in Washington like this awful law does. And so I'm committed to repealing this law. But in the meantime, I urge my colleagues to support the bill that's coming to the floor tomorrow, a bill that deals with one of the disastrous aspects of this law that I haven't mentioned, and that is the risk to millions of Americans that their personal information can be divulged, can be stolen, because of the lack of security in the Obamacare website. This is a horrendous problem. Millions of Americans are at risk, and there's no accountability. And so what we're asking is that we put that accountability in place, that if people's personal information is lost, those folks have to be notified. The federal government thinks that businesses should live by that standard. The federal government said that states that set up their exchanges should live by that standard. Well, I say the federal government ought to live by the same standard. And if that personal information is compromised, then the individual should be notified, and the government should take responsibility and rectify the situation. And so this is simple, common sense legislation that I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I hope our colleagues in the other body, I hope the President will support. We owe it to the American people to do the right thing, to make sure their information is secure. And if something happens, God forbid, we do the right thing and notify those individuals. And we rectify the situation. We take responsibility for it. So I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. It is the right thing to do by the American people. And I urge them to vote yes tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the